I opened a credit card to cover Mom's medical bills. A few days later, I saw a video of my brother's kids landing in a helicopter. My name is Eliza Monroe. I'm 30 years old, and this is the story of how my family broke me and how I finally learned to put the pieces back together for myself. The call that changed everything came at 9:13 a.m. I remember the exact time because I was standing in my kitchen, my body aching from a 12-hour night shift in the ER. A polite, clinical voice from the hospital's billing department informed me that Mom's insurance wouldn't cover her scheduled biopsy. The out-of-pocket cost was $6,400, and they needed it paid in full before the procedure. The number felt like a punch to the gut. My savings were gone, used for a recent car repair. I knew instantly that asking for help was pointless. My father would only complain about the system, and my brother Dylan was always in the middle of some grand business plan that left him perpetually short on cash. The burden, as it always did, settled on me, so I did what the responsible daughter does. I sat at my laptop, my fingers moving numbly, and searched for medical credit cards. The interest rates were predatory, but the fear of what the biopsy might find was stronger than any financial anxiety. I filled out the online application, my heart pounding. A small loading wheel spun for a few seconds, and then a single word appeared on the screen. Approved. A wave of relief so intense it nearly made me dizzy washed over me. I immediately called the hospital and paid the bill, then called Mom to reassure her. Her voice was frail with worry. "It's all taken care of, Mom," I said, forcing a cheerful tone. "Don't worry about a thing." For a brief moment, hearing her relief made me feel like I'd done the right thing. 3 days later, that feeling was shattered. While scrolling on my phone, waiting for an update on her procedure, a loud, colorful video posted by my sister-in-law, Chloe, filled my screen. It showed my twin nieces squealing with delight as a helicopter landed in a field for their 7th birthday party. Confetti cannons exploded. In the background, my mother was laughing, clapping her hands, looking vibrant and joyful. The caption read, "Making childhood magical, sponsored by family." Then, a close-up shot showed my brother, Dylan, grinning as he paid a vendor. He held up a sleek black credit card for the camera to see. The world tilted. The light caught the embossed silver letters. It was my name, Eliza M. Monroe. It was the emergency card, the one I had opened to save her. But before I tell you how everything flipped, like and subscribe, and drop a comment to let me know where you're watching from. I'm an ER nurse in Seattle. My life is a carefully constructed routine of 12-hour shifts, charting, and the constant low-level hum of adrenaline that comes with knowing you're often the only thing standing between a person's bad day and their last day. I'm good at my job. I'm calm in a crisis. I can look at chaos, a car crash victim, a heart attack, a frightened child, and I can see a clear, step-by-step path to making it better. Triage, stabilize, treat. I bring order to disorder. It's what I do. It's the only world where my efforts yield predictable, tangible results. At the hospital, competence is the currency. You do the work, you get the outcome. For a long time, it was my refuge from the chaotic, emotional economy of my family, where the rules were always changing and my value was conditional. I was born into the role of the steady one. It wasn't a conscious choice, more like a groove that was carved for me from my earliest memories. The responsible one. The one who remembered birthdays, packed the emergency first aid kit for road trips, and made sure the bills were paid on time when my parents let them pile up on the kitchen counter. It wasn't a role I auditioned for. It was handed to me, a heavy coat that I learned to wear without complaint, because complaining only made the house feel colder. My brother, Dylan, 2 years my senior, was born for a different role, the golden child, the star of the show. Where I was quiet and observant, he was a spectacle. He filled every room with his booming laugh, his grand stories, and his endless, dazzling potential. Growing up, our home revolved around his gravitational pull. His football games were mandatory family events, complete with banners and post-game celebrations, regardless of whether he won or lost. My debate team victories were met with a distracted, "Oh, that's nice, honey," before the conversation inevitably shifted back to Dylan's latest venture. I remember our 5th grade science fair like it was yesterday. I spent 2 months meticulously building a working model of the solar system, with tiny, hand-painted planets that actually rotated around a light bulb sun. I read every book I could find, wrote a detailed report, and rehearsed my presentation until I could recite it in my sleep. Dylan naturally forgot about his project until the night before. I watched in a state of quiet disbelief as my father, after a brief, theatrical sigh, stayed up with him until 2 a.m., helping him glue sugar cubes into a wobbly model of an igloo. Dad called it a lesson in creative problem solving. The next day, I stood by my complex functioning model and was passed over by the judges, who spent 10 minutes at Dylan's table, laughing as he charmed them with a completely fabricated story about Eskimo architecture. He won second place for most creative. My father clapped him on the back, beaming with pride, and told him, "That's my boy, always finding a way to win." My mother hugged him, telling him how clever he was. No one mentioned my solar system. That day, I learned a crucial lesson. In my family, my effort was invisible, but his performance was everything. This dynamic was reinforced by our parents at every turn. Mom was the architect of Dylan's myth. She adored his charm, interpreting his recklessness as confidence and his failures as learning opportunities. When he dropped out of college after 2 semesters because he found the classes uninspiring, she told all her friends that he was a budding entrepreneur, too brilliant to be constrained by formal education. She curated his image, protecting the fragile ego of her golden boy from the harsh realities of consequence. She was the public relations manager for the brand named Dylan. Dad was his chief financial backer and enabler. He saw a younger, more daring version of himself in my brother. He loved the idea of Dylan the risk-taker, the big swinging mogul in the making. "You gotta spend money to make money, Eliza," he'd say to me with a wink whenever I questioned another one of Dylan's expensive investments. Dad didn't just excuse Dylan's failures, he romanticized them. Dylan wasn't irresponsible. He was a visionary. He wasn't failing. He was pivoting. My father was so invested in the performance of Dylan's ambition that he couldn't, or wouldn't, see that the stage was built on a foundation of my forgotten needs and future earnings. And so, I learned to disappear. I became the family's silent infrastructure, the unseen, unacknowledged support system that allowed the show to go on. When the internet went out, it was me on the phone with tech support for an hour, because Dylan had an important call, and Mom found the hold music grating. When our parents' anniversary came around, I was the one who planned the dinner, bought the gift, and reminded Dylan to at least sign the card. He'd scrawl his name, flash a charming smile, and somehow get credit for the thoughtful gesture I had orchestrated. My contributions were absorbed into the family ecosystem without a ripple, like rain into dry soil. There was no thank you, no acknowledgement of the time or effort it took. My help wasn't a gift, it was my function. I was the stagehand, forever in the wings, making sure the lighting was perfect for the star of the show. Choosing to become an ER nurse was, in retrospect, a subconscious reaction to my upbringing. It was a desperate search for a world with clear rules and fair rewards. In the ER, my hard work mattered in a way it never did at home. When I correctly identify the subtle signs of a stroke, I can get a patient the treatment that saves their brain function. When I hold a patient's hand through a terrifying diagnosis, I see the gratitude in their eyes. There is a direct, measurable line between my actions and the outcome. It's a world of cause and effect, a world that makes sense. At home, I could pour my entire being into solving a problem, and the only outcome was that the goalposts would be moved and a new problem would appear. Saving a life at the hospital felt like a victory. Saving my family just felt like delaying their next self-imposed disaster. But the habit of being the fixer is a hard one to break. I was conditioned to respond to every family crisis like a 911 call. The guilt was their pager, and it went off at all hours. Saying no felt like a betrayal, a dereliction of a duty that had been assigned to me before I was old enough to understand what it was. I chose to be the steady one because the alternative, the confrontation, the accusations of being selfish or uncaring, felt like a Category 5 hurricane I was too tired to face. It was always easier in the moment to just pay the bill, solve the problem, and be the foundation. I didn't realize that a foundation buried under enough weight will eventually, inevitably, crack. The helicopter wasn't a singular event. It was a grand finale. It was the explosive, undeniable culmination of a pattern that had been methodically woven into the fabric of my life for over a decade. The threads of this pattern were made of guilt, obligation, and their casual disregard for my financial and emotional well-being. It started so small, with requests that seemed reasonable on the surface, but it was a slow, creeping erosion of boundaries that left me exposed and vulnerable. The first significant crack appeared right after I graduated from nursing school. I landed my first job at Seattle General and, for the first time, felt a sense of control over my life. I was living in a tiny apartment with a roommate, but I was meticulously saving every extra dollar. My goal was taped to my refrigerator, a photo of a sunny studio apartment in a quiet neighborhood. It represented independence, a space that was truly my own, free from the constant hum of family obligation. I had a chart on my wall, coloring in a little square for every $100 I saved. It was my private, hopeful little project. Then came the call from Dylan. His voice was a practiced blend of casualness and urgency, a tone I would come to recognize as his preamble to a request. "Hey, sis," he began, the sound of music in the background. "So crazy story. I'm in a bit of a jam. You know that freelance web design gig I was working on? The client is dragging their feet on the final payment? Total jerk. Anyway, rent is due and I'm about 1,000 short. I'm good for it, I swear. The check should clear in a week, maybe 2. Can you float me? You're the only one I can count on, Eliza. You're always so on top of things." He had framed it perfectly. It was a temporary problem, caused by a jerk client. He praised my responsibility, making me feel like the capable one, the savior. He made it seem like I was his only hope. I looked at the savings chart on my wall, at all those colored-in squares. $1,000 would set me back 2 months. I hesitated, a knot of unease tightening in my stomach. "I don't know, Dylan. I'm really trying to save up. I know. And I'm so proud of you for that," he said, his voice turning syrupy sweet. "Think of this as an investment in me. Once I land my next big client, I'll take you out for the fanciest dinner in Seattle to thank you. Please, Eliza, he's threatening to evict me." The threat of eviction was the final push. I couldn't let my brother be homeless. My own dream felt selfish in comparison. "Okay," I said, the word tasting like defeat. "Okay, I'll send it." I transferred the money, a significant chunk of my hard-won independence, and felt a familiar mix of resentment and virtue. I was being a good sister. That's what mattered. A week later, his Instagram was filled with pictures of a weekend trip to a music festival in Portland. He was laughing, covered in glitter, with a beer in his hand. The caption read, "Needed to blow off some steam. YOLO." The freelance check, he later told me, fell through. The client was a total flake. He never paid me back. I stared at the blank squares on my savings chart and felt a cold, quiet anger that I promptly swallowed down. Confronting him would just lead to a fight, and Mom and Dad would inevitably take his side, telling me I needed to be more understanding. That was the template. From then on, the requests became more frequent and more significant. About a year later, my father called me in a genuine panic. He had a cracked molar that had become abscessed, and the pain was excruciating. "Eliza, the dentist says I need a root canal and a crown right away. It's going to be $4,000, and my insurance is garbage. Your mother is a wreck, she hasn't slept." The script was the same. I asked the token question. "What about Dylan?" "You know Dylan," Dad said with a heavy sigh that was part frustration, part pride. "He's pouring everything he has into his new startup. Every penny is tied up in developing the prototype. The timing is just terrible for him." It was always terrible timing for Dylan. It was never terrible timing for me to derail my own life. I was a nurse. I had a steady income. In their eyes, my money was liquid and available, while Dylan's was always tied up in the noble pursuit of his next brilliant idea. So I went to my credit union. I sat in a sterile office across from a loan officer who looked at my pristine credit score and my steady employment history and approved me for a small personal loan without a second thought. I felt a perverse sense of shame, as if my responsibility was being weaponized against me. I signed the papers, my hand feeling strangely disconnected from my body. I was officially taking on debt for my father's tooth. The relief in my parents' voices when I told them it was handled was palpable. They sent a thank you card. Inside, my mother had written, "You have a heart of gold, Eliza. You are the glue that holds this family together." The words were meant as a compliment, but they felt like a life sentence. The glue doesn't get to move. The glue just holds the broken pieces together, becoming invisible once it dries. Every month for 2 years, I made a payment on that loan. It was a constant, draining reminder that my financial health was secondary to their comfort. The pattern escalated from emergencies to conveniences. There was the time Dylan's car broke down, and he borrowed mine for 2 weeks, returning it with a new scratch on the bumper and the gas tank on empty. He laughed it off. "Adds character," he said, before asking if he could borrow $50 for the cab ride home. There was the time Mom and Dad wanted to go on a cruise for their anniversary, a trip they couldn't afford. I gifted them the down payment, a sum I had been saving for a much-needed vacation of my own, because Mom hinted that their marriage was in a rut, and this could be just the thing to fix it. The breaking point for any pretense of these being loans came when Dylan decided he needed to rebrand. This involved him throwing out all his old clothes and buying a new wardrobe of designer suits to impress potential investors. He maxed out his own credit cards and then came to me. This time I was determined to be firm. I sat him down at my kitchen table and wrote out a simple IOU on a piece of notebook paper, detailing the $2,000 he was asking for. "I need you to sign this." "Dylan," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "This is a lot of money for me. I need to know I'm getting it back." He looked at the paper, then at me, and let out a short, incredulous laugh. "An IOU? Are you serious?" He picked it up and waved it in the air. "What is this, a courtroom? Eliza, come on. We're family." Mom, who had been in the other room, walked in, drawn by the tension. "What's going on?" she asked. Dylan showed her the paper, a smirk on his face. She smiled that soft, placating smile that always made me feel like a difficult child. "Oh, sweetheart, that's so formal. Don't be silly. Your brother has every intention of paying you back. We don't need contracts between us." They laughed together. It wasn't a cruel laugh. It was worse. It was a laugh of genuine amusement, of pity for my silly, formal little ways. It was the laugh of people who hold all the power and are tickled by the powerless one's attempts to create rules. In that moment, I felt utterly humiliated. My attempt to establish a simple boundary was treated as a joke. I slowly took the piece of paper back, folded it, and put it in my pocket. The unsigned IOU felt hot against my skin. I didn't throw it away. I took it home and put it in a small shoebox in the back of my closet. Over the years, that box had become a sad little archive of my family's betrayals. The unsigned IOU joined printed-out text messages from Dylan promising repayment, bank transfer confirmations labeled loan, and even a birthday card from my parents thanking me for paying their property taxes one year. I kept them as proof, not for them, but for me. They were my evidence that I wasn't imagining it. I wasn't being overly sensitive or dramatic. I was being used, and I was keeping the receipts. That Friday morning, the city of Seattle was weeping. A steady gray drizzle coated my apartment window, blurring the world outside into a watercolor painting of muted greens and grays. I had just come home from a brutal night shift in the ER. The air still felt thick with the ghosts of the night's emergencies, the frantic energy, the smell of sterile gloves, the beep of heart monitors. We'd lost a patient, a 19-year-old on a motorcycle who had been hit by a drunk driver. I had spent hours helping the team, performing CPR long after we knew it was hopeless, because his mother was on her way, and we didn't want her to arrive to a silent room. I had been the one to stand with her in the small, quiet family room afterward, a silent witness to a grief so immense it felt like it would swallow the entire hospital. I came home hollowed out, my body a leaden weight of exhaustion, my soul scraped raw. All I wanted was to crawl into the darkness of my bedroom and sleep for 1,000 years. I went through the motions of my post-shift ritual, stripping off my scrubs and sealing them in a plastic bag, taking a scalding hot shower to wash the hospital off my skin, making a cup of chamomile tea with trembling hands. The quiet of my apartment was a welcome relief after the cacophony of the ER. As I sat at my small kitchen table waiting for the tea to cool, I picked up my phone. It was a mindless habit, a way to numbly scroll through the lives of others to distract myself from the raw edges of my own. I saw a friend's new puppy, a cousin's vacation photos from Hawaii, an ad for a meal delivery service. It was a gentle, predictable stream of mundane life, and it was exactly what my frayed nerves needed. And then, it appeared on my feed. A video posted by my sister-in-law, Chloe. It exploded onto my screen like a firework, a violent assault of sound and color that was completely alien to the gray, quiet world I was inhabiting. The first thing I heard was the percussive whump 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 of helicopter blades, layered over with a saccharine pop song blasting at full volume. The image was a brilliant, almost painful green, a vast, manicured lawn under a surprisingly sunny sky somewhere outside the city. The video was professionally shot, edited with quick cuts and dramatic zooms. It looked like a commercial for a life I couldn't possibly imagine. There were my nieces, Lily and Rose, dressed in ridiculously ornate princess gowns, squealing and jumping as the helicopter descended. Then, the explosion of confetti cannons, showering the air in a shimmering cloud of pink and gold. The camera panned across a scene of obscene opulence, a bouncy castle shaped like a fairy tale palace, a live pony decorated with ribbons, a catering staff serving tiny, perfect-looking appetizers. It was a child's birthday party that cost more than my car. My first reaction was a dull throb of resentment. It was just so much, so performative. But then I saw my mother. She was standing next to Dylan, her arm linked through his, and she was laughing. It wasn't a small, polite laugh. It was a deep, joyous, head-thrown-back laugh of pure delight. The sound of it was a physical blow. Just 3 days ago, her voice on the phone had been thin and brittle with anxiety about the biopsy. I had carried that anxiety with me for 72 hours. I had felt it sitting like a stone in my own stomach. And here she was, the picture of health and happiness, at the center of this ridiculous spectacle. The caption at the bottom of the screen glowed with sickening sincerity. Family means giving your all. The hypocrisy was so profound it made me nauseous. I had just given my all. I had willingly walked into financial precarity, taking on a debt with a monstrous interest rate, all for her, to ease her worry, to ensure her health, and the thanks I got was to see that sacrifice used as the backdrop for an Instagram-worthy party. I almost swiped away. My brain was actively trying to reject the information, to shield me from the pain of it. But a morbid curiosity, a need to see the full extent of the train wreck, made me watch it again. I turned the volume off, needing to see it without the distracting, cheerful music. I played it back in silence, my eyes scanning every frame like a detective looking for clues. And that's when I found the murder weapon. The video cut to a close-up shot. Dylan was at a vendor's table, presumably the one that provided the helicopter or the confetti cannons. He was paying. He turned to Chloe's camera, a big, cheesy look-at-me grin on his face. He was performing his role as the great provider. He pulled a wallet from the pocket of his crisp linen pants and brandished a credit card, holding it up to the light for a moment, a little flourish for the camera. It was a sleek, black card. For a split second, my mind registered it as his. Of course Dylan has a fancy black card, I thought. It fit his carefully curated image of a successful up-and-coming entrepreneur. But something was wrong. Something about the way the light glinted off the bank logo was familiar. My heart started to pound, a frantic, trapped bird rhythm against my ribs. I paused the video. My thumb, slick with sweat, struggled to work the controls. I dragged the slider back, frame by frame. Then I zoomed in. I enlarged the image until it was a grainy mosaic of pixels, the edges blurred and indistinct. But it was clear enough. There was no mistaking the minimalist, modern logo of the financial company that had approved me for the medical credit card 3 days ago. And then I saw the name, embossed in silver letters, partially obscured by his thumb, but still terrifyingly legible. Eliza M. Monroe. The phone slipped from my grasp, clattering onto the table. The tea in my mug sloshed over the side. A wave of vertigo washed over me, and I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself. The air in my lungs turned to ice. It wasn't just a card. It was the card, the one I had opened for the sole, sacred purpose of paying for my mother's biopsy. My mind, trained to triage and analyze, started racing, putting the pieces together with a horrifying speed and clarity. The $10,000 limit, the $6,400 charge for the hospital, that left $3,600. This party, this helicopter and confetti and catering, cost far more than that. The caption on a different photo mentioned the party planner and the cost, $15,000. How? Then I remembered something the bank representative had said when I'd called to activate the card. Would you like to add an authorized user, Ms. Monroe? I had said no, of course not. But could they have called back? Could my mother, knowing the account existed, have called and added Dylan? Or worse, had she just given him the number? The trust I had placed in her, the fundamental belief that my mother would protect me, crumbled into dust. She wasn't just a bystander in this. She was an accomplice. She was standing right there, clapping and laughing, while my financial future was being set on fire to light up their party. The betrayal was so absolute, so breathtakingly cruel, that it transcended anger. It was a deep structural wound. It felt like discovering the very foundation of my life was a lie. The pain was physical, a cold, heavy weight pressing down on my chest, making it impossible to breathe. I had opened that card to save her life, and they had used it for fireworks. For what felt like an eternity, I just sat there, my gaze fixed on the dark screen of my phone. My body was locked in a state of shock, a clinical paralysis I recognized from watching families receive devastating news in the hospital. My mind, however, was a maelstrom. The same images played on a loop, the helicopter descending, my mother's ecstatic laughter, Dylan's smug grin, and my name, on that piece of black plastic. The initial shock began to recede, and in its place, a tide of hot, corrosive anger started to rise. It was an anger so pure and potent it vibrated through my entire body. I had to call them. I had to hear them explain this. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely unlock my phone. I scrolled through my contacts, my thumb hovering over Dylan's name before skipping past it. He would just lie. He would spin a story, charm his way around it, and make me feel crazy for even asking. No, I had to talk to my mother. I clung to a microscopic, pathetic shred of hope that she was somehow a victim in this, that Dylan had deceived her too. It was a foolish hope, a dying ember of the daughter I used to be, but I needed to let it burn out completely. She answered on the second ring, her voice effervescent, still coasting on the high of the party. "Hi, sweetheart. I was just thinking about you. Were you calling to see how the biopsy went?" The doctor was wonderful, so gentle. Everything was fine, and he said we'll have the results by the middle of next week. It was all so smooth. "Thank you again for handling the payment." Her casual, breezy gratitude, juxtaposed with what I now knew, was grotesque. It was like listening to a murderer compliment the weather. I took a deep, shuddering breath, trying to keep my voice from breaking. "I saw the video, Mom," I said. The words came out flat and cold, devoid of any emotion. "Oh, wasn't it just magical?" she gushed, completely oblivious to my tone. "Chloe did such a wonderful job capturing it. Dylan went all out. He has such a generous heart. Those girls, Eliza, they truly felt like real princesses. You should have seen their faces light up when that helicopter landed." "I saw more than their faces," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "I saw the part where Dylan paid for the confetti cannon. He used the new credit card, the black one. The one I opened 3 days ago for your biopsy." The line went silent. It was only for a second or two, but it was a heavy, loaded silence. The bubbly energy vanished, sucked out of the conversation. When she spoke again, her voice had shifted into a different register. It was the soft, gentle, condescending tone she reserved for my overreactions. It was the voice of a zookeeper trying to calm a startled animal. "Oh, sweetheart," she began, her voice dripping with practiced patience. "Don't be dramatic. It was just a matter of convenience. Dylan had all the vendors lined up, and some of them needed to be paid on the spot. It was just easier to use that one card since it had a fresh balance. Dylan will pay you back, you know he will. He's already got a big deal in the pipeline that's about to close any day now. Don't be dramatic." The two words echoed in the cavernous space that had just opened up inside my chest. Dramatic. As if discovering a grand theft. A profound betrayal by my own family was some sort of theatrical overindulgence. "Mom, that wasn't a fresh balance card," I said, my voice trembling with a mixture of rage and disbelief. "That was an emergency medical credit card with a 28% interest rate. I opened it to pay for a procedure you needed because you might have cancer. Do you understand that?" "Well, there's no need to use that kind of language," she chided, her tone becoming defensive. "It's not cancer until they say it's cancer. And this party was important too. It's important to make beautiful memories for the children. Family is about more than just stress and bills, Eliza. It's about joy too." I could hear some shuffling on the other end of the line, and then my father's gruff, impatient voice took over. He must have seen that Mom was failing to manage the situation. "Eliza, your mother's upset. What's all this about?" I felt a surge of adrenaline, the kind I get when an ambulance is 5 minutes out with a critical patient. I laid out the facts, my voice clinical and precise. Dylan charged his daughter's $15,000 birthday party to the emergency medical credit card I opened to pay for Mom's biopsy. I saw it in Chloe's video. My father's response was immediate and absolute. There was no shock, no concern for me, just a solid brick wall of justification. "He needed it," he said, as if that explained everything. "You have to understand, image is everything in his line of work. He had sponsors and potential investors at that party. Putting on a good show is a business expense. It's for his brand. Family helps family. You have a steady job, Eliza. You can handle a little bump in the road. Dylan is out there taking risks for all of us. For all of us." The delusion was so complete, so profound, that it almost defied belief. They had built an entire shared reality around the myth of Dylan the visionary, a reality in which my resources were simply fuel for his engine. "I have to go," I whispered. My throat had closed up. I couldn't form another word. Arguing was pointless. It was like arguing with a tidal wave. They would never see it from my perspective because, in their world, my perspective didn't exist. I hung up the phone before they could deliver another line from their well-rehearsed script. The click of the phone disconnecting was the loudest sound I had ever heard. And then I simply folded. My legs gave out, and I slid down the smooth surface of my kitchen cabinets until I was a crumpled heap on the cold, unforgiving linoleum floor. The tears I had been holding back finally came. But they were not the hot, angry tears I had expected. They were silent. They were tears of profound and absolute loss. I wasn't just crying over the money or the betrayal. I was mourning the death of an illusion I had spent my entire life protecting. The illusion of a loving, supportive family. I was grieving for the little girl who won the science fair and didn't get a single clap, for the young woman who transferred her apartment savings, for the daughter who signed for a loan for her father's tooth. I was crying for every version of me that had made herself smaller so they could feel bigger. I sat on my floor, surrounded by the quiet evidence of my solitary, responsible life, my stack of bills on the counter, my neatly organized budget planner, my sensible 10-year-old car parked outside. I had done everything right. I had been the good daughter, the responsible sister, the reliable one. And my reward was to be the family's secret shame, their human ATM, their emotional and financial dumping ground. The silence in my apartment began to change. It was no longer a quiet refuge from the world. It was a suffocating pressure, the sound of all the things I had never said, all the times I had swallowed my anger and bit my tongue. It was the sound of my own erasure. And in that crushing, deafening silence, something inside me finally, irrevocably, snapped. The rage and the grief began to cool and harden, crystallizing into something new. It was a cold, clear, and unyielding certainty. I saw my family not as flawed, difficult people I loved, but as a system, a machine designed for one purpose, to feed the ego of my brother and maintain the comfort of my parents, and I was its primary source of fuel. To continue participating in this system was a form of self-annihilation. The anger wasn't gone. It had simply transformed. It was no longer a hot, chaotic fire. It was a pilot light, a low, steady internal flame. I wasn't a victim anymore. I was a witness, and I had all the evidence. Sitting there on the cold floor, I realized that my silence had always been their weapon, used against me to ensure my compliance. But the silence I was feeling now was different. It was my own. It was a silence that could burn. I wasn't angry anymore. I was awake. For 2 full days after that phone call, I did nothing. I called in sick to work, something I had never done before, claiming a migraine. In truth, I was paralyzed. I moved between my bed and my couch, a ghost in my own apartment. The anger had cooled into a heavy, dense object in my chest, and I didn't have the strength to move it. I didn't eat. I barely slept. I just let the crushing weight of 30 years of being their shock absorber pin me down. I replayed every memory, every loan, every dismissal, and saw it all through the cold, harsh lens of the helicopter video. The pattern was so obvious, so clear. I felt like a fool for not having seen it sooner. But foolishness was a luxury I could no longer afford. On the 3rd night, something shifted. I was lying in bed, staring at a water stain on my ceiling that looked vaguely like a cracked plate, when a thought surfaced, clear and sharp as a scalpel. If this were a patient, what would you do? In the ER, we have a protocol for trauma. You don't get emotional. You don't panic. You assess the damage, you document everything, you establish a clear, methodical plan of action, and you execute it. You stabilize the patient before you treat the wound, and I was the patient. My life was the trauma. I got out of bed, walked to my laptop, and opened a new spreadsheet. The anger was still there, but I channeled it. It became my fuel, a source of cold, clean energy. This wasn't going to be an emotional outburst. It was going to be an audit. For the next 3 nights after my shifts at the hospital, I didn't sleep. I worked. I spent hours building a timeline, a meticulous, undeniable history of my own exploitation. I started with my bank records, going back 10 years. I scrolled through every transaction, every transfer, every check. Each one was a small, painful memory. A $200 transfer to Dylan Monroe. Memo, rent. $4,000 payment to Northgate Dental. Memo, dad's surgery. $2,000 transfer to Dylan Monroe. Memo, suits. $3,000 charge at Serenity Spa and Resort. Memo, mom's retreat. The list went on and on, a river of my earnings flowing in one direction. I cross-referenced every payment with the shoebox of evidence I kept in my closet. I scanned the unsigned IOUs. I took screenshots of the text message conversations. Hey sis, can you spot me? I swear I'll pay you back on the 1st. He never did. Eliza, your father is so proud. He's telling everyone you bought him his new golf clubs. I had paid for them because Dad had hinted. His old ones were embarrassing him at the country club. I lined up the dates of their emergencies with the dates I had worked overtime shifts. The correlation was almost perfect. The week I worked 3 doubles in a row was the same week I paid to have their dead oak tree removed from the yard. The holiday bonus I received in December was gone by January, used to pay off Dylan's credit card debt after a disastrous Christmas shopping season. The total was staggering, not including the new $15,000 charge. I had given them, loaned them, or paid on their behalf over $78,000 in 10 years. $78,000. I stared at the number at the bottom of the spreadsheet, and I felt nothing but a cold, hollow certainty. The next step was the credit cards. I logged into the account for the new medical card. The charge was there, $15,450.22, Event Planning Services, LLC. Beneath it was the $6,400 charge from the hospital. My stomach churned. Then my curiosity hardening into suspicion. I ran a full credit report on myself. My score, usually pristine, had dropped 30 points. And then I saw why. Under my open accounts, there were 3 cards with the same bank that had issued the medical card. 3. I only had 1. My hands started to shake again, but this time it was with adrenaline, not shock. I picked up the phone and dialed the number on the back of my card. After navigating the automated menu, a cheerful customer service representative named Brenda answered. "Hi, Brenda," I said, my voice steady. "My name is Eliza Monroe. I'm calling because I ran a credit report, and I see 3 active accounts with your bank under my name, but I only recall opening one." I could hear the click of her keyboard. "Okay, Ms. Monroe, I can help you with that. Can you verify your social security number and date of birth for me?" I gave her the information. More clicking. "All right, I see the accounts here," she said. "Yes, there are 3. The first was the one you opened on Tuesday, the medical card. The other 2? Let's see. One was opened 6 months ago, and the other one was opened over a year ago." A year ago. My mind raced. What happened a year ago? It was when Dylan had launched his last failed startup, a gourmet dog food delivery service. He had needed seed money. "Brenda," I said carefully, "I did not open those other 2 cards. Is there a record of who did?" "Well, the applications were submitted online," she explained. "But I can see that on both of the older accounts, a secondary user was added on the same day the account was opened. The name is Dylan Monroe." There it was. The cold, hard, documented proof. "And the address for this Dylan Monroe?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "It's the same primary address as yours on the account, Ms. Monroe," she said. "But it wasn't my address. It was my parents' address." It was my parents' address. He had used their address, my name, my social security number, which he would have known by heart, and opened cards in my name. The balances weren't huge, a few thousand on each, but it was the sheer audacity, the premeditated fraud. This wasn't just a pattern of taking advantage of my kindness. This was a crime. "Brenda," I said, my voice low, "I need you to do something for me. I need you to record this. I am officially stating that I, Eliza Monroe, did not authorize the opening of those 2 accounts, nor did I authorize Dylan Monroe to be a user on any of my accounts, including the one I did open on Tuesday. I am a victim of identity theft." Brenda's cheerful tone vanished, replaced by a serious, professional one. "I understand, Ms. Monroe. I am flagging these accounts for fraud right now. We will need you to file a police report and a formal affidavit." I wrote down everything she said. I got a case number. I saved every word. After I hung up, I sat in silence for a full minute, the reality of it settling over me. This was bigger and uglier than I could have imagined. I was in over my head. I needed help. Not family help. Real help. I called Rachel Lopez. We had been in nursing school together, 2 smart, no-nonsense women who bonded over late-night study sessions and a shared dark sense of humor. While I stayed in clinical care, Rachel had gone on to get her MBA and had become a certified financial counselor. She specialized in helping people, mostly women, escape financially abusive situations. I hadn't talked to her in a few months, but I knew she was the only one who would understand. "Eliza, hey, how are you?" she answered, her voice warm and familiar. "Rachel," I said, and then my voice broke. I couldn't hold it together anymore. The clinical detachment shattered and the pain of the last week came pouring out. I told her everything. The pattern, the loans, the excuses, the science fair, the helicopter, the credit cards. I talked for 20 minutes straight, the words tumbling out in a messy, tearful confession. She listened patiently, not interrupting once. When I finally finished, the only sound was my own ragged breathing. "Okay," Rachel said, her voice firm and clear, cutting through my emotional fog. "First of all, breathe. Second, none of this is your fault. You were raised in a system designed to use you. They conditioned you to be their emergency fund." "I know, but I feel so stupid," I sobbed. "Stop," she said, her voice sharp but not unkind. "You're not stupid. You're loyal." And they took that loyalty and monetized it. But that's over now. The first thing we're going to do is freeze everything. Credit reports, bank accounts, everything. Next, we're going to file the police report for the fraudulent cards. And for the $15,000 on the medical card, that's a different kind of fraud, but it's fraud nonetheless. We'll dispute the charge and file a claim. I don't know if I can, I whispered. They're my family. There was a pause on the line, and then Rachel said the words that would change everything. Eliza listened to me very carefully. Based on what you've told me, with the documented history and the unauthorized accounts, you need to stop thinking of this as a family squabble. You're not helping family anymore. You're documenting a crime. A crime. The word landed with the force of a physical blow. A crime. It was such a harsh, ugly word, but it was the right one. What they had done wasn't just selfish or thoughtless. It was illegal. It was theft. For the first time in years, someone wasn't telling me to calm down. Someone wasn't telling me I was being dramatic. Someone was telling me that my pain was valid, my anger was justified, and that I had the right to stand up. Okay, I said, my voice stronger now. Okay, what's the first step? That night, for the first time in a week, I slept. It wasn't a peaceful sleep, but it was a determined one. The fog had lifted. I had a protocol. I had a plan. And I had a folder on my desk, getting thicker by the hour, filled with the cold, hard, undeniable truth. The invitation came, as I knew it would, the following Thursday. It was a text from my mother. Hi, sweetheart. Sunday dinner at our place, 6 p.m. I'm making your favorite, lasagna. Let me know. Love, Mom. The casual, breezy cheerfulness of it was a masterpiece of denial. It was as if our last conversation had never happened, as if she hadn't dismissed my pain, as if my father hadn't justified my brother's theft. This was their strategy. Pretend the unpleasantness never occurred, and I, the good, responsible daughter, would eventually fall back in line, swallowing my feelings as I always had. The lasagna was the bait, a symbol of nostalgic comfort, of a time when I believed our family was normal. For years that bait would have worked. But this time, I wasn't the one being trapped. I'll be there, I texted back. For the next 3 days, I prepared for that dinner like a lawyer preparing for a trial. With Rachel's guidance, I had organized everything. I printed out the spreadsheet detailing the $78,000. I printed the bank statements for the 2 fraudulent credit cards, with Dylan's purchases circled in red. Expensive dinners, online shopping sprees, a weekend rental for a sports car. I printed the statement for the medical card, showing the back-to-back charges from the hospital and the event planner. I printed the screenshots of texts, the unsigned IOUs, and a summary of my conversation with Brenda from the bank's fraud department, complete with my case number. I compiled it all into a crisp black folder. It was about an inch thick. It felt heavier than it looked, weighted with years of silent resentment. On Sunday evening, I dressed carefully, not in my usual jeans and sweater, but in a sharp blazer and dark pants. It was my armor. Holding the folder, I drove to my parents' house, the same house I grew up in. The route was so familiar I could have driven it with my eyes closed. But tonight, I felt like a stranger going into enemy territory. When I walked in, the scene was exactly as I had pictured it. The smell of garlic and oregano hung in the air. My father was in his favorite armchair, watching a football game, a glass of red wine in his hand. My mother was bustling in the kitchen, humming. Dylan, his wife Chloe, and the twins were in the living room. Lily and Rose were showing off new, expensive-looking dolls. Dylan was on his phone, bragging loudly to someone about a potential investor he had met at the party. He was totally blown away by the scale of the event, Dylan said, his voice booming. You have to create a perception of success, you know? Go big or go home. He looked up and saw me standing in the doorway. Eliza, there she is! We were just talking about the party. You should have come. It was epic. Hello, Dylan, I said, my voice even. Mom came out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. Sweetheart, you made it. She came to hug me, but I took a small step back, holding up the folder slightly. Her smile faltered for a second, a flicker of confusion in her eyes before she recovered. Well, come in, come in. Dinner's almost ready. We ate. The conversation was a performance of normalcy. They talked about the weather, my father's golf game, Chloe's new volunteer committee. They asked me superficial questions about work, which I answered in short, polite sentences. They carefully, skillfully talked around the gaping black hole in the middle of our family. I sat there, eating the lasagna that was supposed to comfort me, feeling the cold weight of the folder on the chair beside me. I was a bomb, ticking silently at their dinner table. Finally, as my mother stood to clear the plates for dessert, I knew it was time. Before dessert, I said, my voice cutting through the chatter. It wasn't loud, but it was clear and firm, and it made everyone stop. My father muted the TV. Dylan put down his phone. The twins, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, fell silent. I want to talk about the money, I said. My mother froze, her back to me. She turned around slowly, her face arranged into an expression of weary patience. Eliza, please, can we not do this now? We're having such a lovely evening. We're doing this now, I said. Dylan leaned back in his chair and smirked, a look of arrogant boredom on his face. You're still on about that? God, Eliza, I told you I'll pay you back. You're going to get your money. Lighten up. I didn't look at him. I picked up the folder from the chair beside me. I stood up, walked to the head of the table, and placed it down with a soft, definitive thud. I opened it and took out the first 3 pages. I slid one in front of my father, one in front of my mother, and one directly in front of Dylan. It was my credit report, 3 pages listing every account, every balance, every inquiry. I had highlighted the 3 cards from the one bank. This isn't about the $15,000 for the party anymore, I said calmly, my voice resonating in the still air. This is about the 2 credit cards you, Dylan, opened in my name over the past year without my knowledge. This is about the balances you've been racking up, and the late fees that have been damaging my credit score. This is about identity theft. The change in the room was instantaneous. The air went from tense to ice cold. My father's face, which had been relaxed with wine, hardened. He picked up the paper, his jaw tightening as he read it. My mother just stared at her copy, her hand fluttering to her throat, her face pale. Dylan's smirk vanished. It was like a mask had fallen off, revealing a slack-jawed panic underneath. What? What are you talking about? That's crazy, is it? I continued, my voice betraying no emotion. I reached into the folder and pulled out the next set of documents, the printed bank statements for those fraudulent cards. I laid them on the table. Here are the charges. A weekend at the Fairmont Olympic Hotel in Seattle, multiple dinners at Canlis, a subscription to a custom suit service. Does any of this look familiar? I then placed the statement for the medical card on top of the pile, the 2 massive charges sitting side by side. I looked directly at my mother. And here is the card I opened for you, for your health, the one you told me not to be dramatic about. My father threw the papers down on the table. This is ridiculous, he growled. A family disagreement. You don't handle things like this with papers and accusations. You're right, I said, my gaze unwavering. I shouldn't have to. But this isn't a disagreement. I looked from my mother's stricken face to my father's rising anger, and finally, I landed my gaze on my brother. His eyes were wide with fear. He looked like a cornered animal. This is theft. The word hung in the air, ugly and undeniable. Even the twins had stopped moving, their dolls forgotten in their laps. You're overreacting, Dad snapped. No, I said calmly, my voice dropping lower. I'm not. For the past week, I've been working with a financial counselor and the bank's fraud department. I have a police report filed for the identity theft, and I am pressing charges for all of it if the full, combined balance of every fraudulent charge and unauthorized loan, which comes to $96,000, is not resolved in 30 days. The silence that followed was absolute. It was so complete I could hear the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Chloe was staring at Dylan, her mouth slightly open in horror. My mother looked like she was going to faint. Dylan finally found his voice. It was a pathetic, cracking whisper. You wouldn't, he stammered. You wouldn't do that. Not to your own family. I looked him dead in the eyes. The fear, the entitlement, the lifetime of getting away with everything. I saw it all, and I felt nothing but a cold, hard sense of purpose. You already did, I said. Then I closed my folder, picked it up, and walked out the door without looking back. The moment I closed the front door behind me, the adrenaline that had been holding me together vanished, and my body began to tremble. I made it to my car and sat in the driver's seat, my hands shaking so violently I couldn't put the key in the ignition. I had done it. After a lifetime of silence, I had detonated a truth bomb in the middle of their carefully constructed world. It was the hardest thing I had ever done. But as I sat there in the quiet darkness of my car, parked on the street I grew up on, I didn't feel regret. I felt a sliver of something I hadn't felt in a very long time, power. The fallout began less than an hour later. My phone, which had been silent on the drive home, lit up with my mother's name. I ignored it. It rang again. I ignored it. Then a string of frantic text messages appeared. Eliza, please call me. We need to talk about this. You have misunderstood everything. Your father is very upset. How could you threaten your brother like that? You've terrified him. The texts were a masterclass in deflection and guilt. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of the facts I had laid on their dining room table. It was all about my reaction, my threat, my misunderstanding. As if the bank statements and credit reports were figments of my imagination. I read the messages, and for the first time, they had no effect on me. The guilt, pager, as Rachel called it, had been deactivated. By Monday morning, my phone had become a weapon being used against me. They escalated their tactics. My mother abandoned the pretense of calm discussion and left a series of tearful, hysterical voicemails. "I don't know what we did to deserve this," she cried, her voice thick with manufactured anguish. "We gave you everything, and this is how you repay us? By trying to ruin your brother's life? He could go to jail, Eliza. Do you want your own brother to go to jail?" My father's approach was different. He didn't plead. He commanded. He left one single furious voicemail. "Eliza Monroe! You call me back right now!" He boomed, his voice distorted with rage. "You have created a mess, and you are going to fix it. You will call that bank, and you will drop this nonsense immediately. This is not how our family operates. This is not how our family operates." He was right. Their family operated on my silent compliance. My refusal to comply had broken the machine, and they were furious. Dylan predictably took the coward's way out. He didn't call. He didn't text. He simply blocked my number. His wife, Chloe, after sending a single vicious text calling me a jealous, spiteful bitch, blocked me as well. It was a coordinated shunning, a childish attempt to ice me out and make me feel so isolated that I would come crawling back, desperate for their approval. It would have worked a month ago. Now their silence was a gift. The one person I did talk to was Rachel. I called her Monday afternoon and walked her through the entire dinner. "Good," she said when I finished. "You were calm, you were factual, and you gave them a clear deadline. Now comes the hard part, holding the line while they try every manipulation tactic in the book." "They're already starting," I said, my voice weary. "Let them," Rachel said firmly. "It's just noise. It's the sound of their world crumbling. Now are you ready? We're filing the fraud claim on the medical card charge today." With Rachel on the line, I called the bank again, this time to dispute the $15,450 charge for the party. I calmly and clearly explained that I had authorized a charge from the hospital, but that the subsequent charge from the event planner was made by an unauthorized user. Because I had already established a fraud case with them, the process was surprisingly swift. They launched an official investigation. The first tangible consequence of my actions came a week later. I received a notification from the bank. As part of their fraud investigation, they had frozen all assets connected to the dispute. This included my brother's joint bank account with Chloe, which he had likely used to make a partial payment to the event planner before using my card. Their primary source of money was locked. That's when my mother's tears turned to disbelief. She found a way to get through to me by calling from a neighbor's phone. "Eliza, they froze Dylan's account," she said, her voice a mixture of panic and outrage. "Chloe can't even buy groceries. The twins have a school field trip and they can't pay for it. How could you do this to them? This has gone too far." I took a deep breath. The Eliza of a month ago would have caved. She would have felt a surge of guilt and rushed to fix it, to smooth everything over. But that Eliza was gone. "I didn't do this," I said, my voice calm and steady. "I am not the one who committed identity theft. I am not the one who charged a $15,000 party to a medical emergency credit card. I'm just the one who is finally tired of paying for everyone else's peace." I hung up the phone. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel vindictive. I just felt tired, but it was a different kind of tired. It wasn't the soul-deep exhaustion of being used. It was the clean, honest fatigue that comes after a long, difficult day of work. The 30-day deadline I had set passed in a storm of silence and angry text messages from extended family members who had been fed a carefully edited version of the story. I was selfish. I was cruel. I was tearing the family apart over money. I ignored them all. Dylan and my parents made no attempt to contact me or to pay back the money. They were gambling, assuming I was bluffing. They were wrong. On the 31st day, I gave Rachel the green light. She worked with the police and the bank, submitting my folder of evidence. The investigation that had been proceeding slowly kicked into high gear. The final letter from the bank arrived on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it. It was a thick envelope. Inside was a detailed report of their investigation's findings. They had concluded that the 2 older credit cards were indeed opened fraudulently. All charges, fees, and interest had been wiped from my record, and the accounts were closed. My credit report would be corrected. More importantly, they had concluded that the $15,450 charge from the event planner was also unauthorized. The charge was reversed. The money was back in my account. I sat down at my kitchen table and stared at the letter. It was over. I had won. But it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like an exhale. It was the feeling of a heavy weight being lifted from your chest. A weight you didn't even realize you were carrying until it was gone. The quiet in my apartment, which had once felt so lonely and suffocating, now felt like oxygen. It was the clean, clear, beautiful sound of peace. I sat there for a long time, just breathing it in. The 3 months that followed the bank's final letter were a study in quiet transformation. The storm had passed, leaving behind a radically altered landscape. My life, which had been so entangled with the constant chaos of my family, was now my own. The silence from them was absolute. No more crisis calls, no more guilt-laden texts, no more last-minute requests for money. It was jarring at first. I kept checking my phone, bracing for an incoming attack that never came. The habit of being on high alert was deeply ingrained, and it took time for my nervous system to understand that I was finally, truly, safe. The consequences for my family, however, were just beginning to unfold. Without my income as his safety net, Dylan's carefully constructed world fell apart with astonishing speed. His brand, which was built on the illusion of success, collapsed. The sponsors and investors he had tried to impress at the party were not, in fact, impressed when the event planner, unpaid because of the chargeback, began calling them, asking if they knew how to get in touch with Dylan Monroe. His reputation was ruined. He and Chloe were forced to sell their oversized house in the suburbs and move into a small rental apartment. The extravagant lifestyle they had flaunted on social media vanished overnight. Their posts became infrequent and subdued. The magic was gone, because the magician's secret assistant had walked off the job. My father retreated into a stony, prideful silence. I heard through an aunt that he was telling people I had changed, that I had become cold and materialistic. He couldn't process the reality that I had simply held them accountable. It was easier to paint me as the villain than to confront his own role as an enabler. His silence was a wall built to protect his wounded ego. I knew he would likely never speak to me again, and a part of me mourned the father I wished he had been. But I did not mourn the man he actually was. My mother was the most complex part of the fallout. The bank's fraud investigation had cleared me, but it also placed the liability for the medical card's use squarely on her and Dylan. The hospital still needed to be paid its $6,400. After weeks of silence, I received a formal, typed letter from her. It was a strange, stilted document, clearly written under the advice of a lawyer. It made no mention of the party or the other credit cards. It simply stated her medical situation and her inability to pay the outstanding bill. It was not an apology. It was a plea, wrapped in the language of formal detachment. I sat with that letter for a long time. My first instinct, the old Eliza instinct, was to feel a surge of guilt. But Rachel had prepared me for this. "You can choose to help," she had told me, "but you do it on your terms, entirely. This is not about saving them. This is about deciding what you are willing to do, without expectation." So, I did something that felt both responsible and revolutionary. I did not call my mother. I did not send money to her or Dylan. I contacted the hospital's billing department directly. I set up a payment plan under my name to cover the $6,400 bill for her biopsy. I arranged for it to be auto-debited from my checking account in small, manageable installments over the next 2 years. I was paying her medical debt, a legitimate family need, but I was doing it in a way that kept me in complete control. There was no lump sum for them to misuse. No grateful phone call for her to use as an opening to pull me back in. It was a clean, sterile transaction. It was my final act as the responsible one, but this time, it was defined by my boundaries, not by their demands. The most profound change, however, happened inside me. I stopped waiting for an apology that I knew would never come. I had clung to the hope that one day they would see the pain they had caused, that they would feel remorse. But accepting that they were incapable of that kind of self-reflection was the key to my own freedom. My peace could not be dependent on their growth. It had to be my own creation. I started small. I took the money that would have been siphoned off for their next emergency, and I opened a high-yield savings account. The banker asked if I wanted to add a secondary user. "No," I said, and the word felt solid and strong in my mouth. "Just me." I set up an automatic transfer, and every payday I watched my balance grow. It was a quiet, deeply satisfying act of self-preservation. That growing number wasn't just money. It was security. It was a future. It was a house that no one but me had a key to. I started investing in my own life. I bought a new set of tires for my car without feeling guilty. I took a weekend trip to the coast and hiked among the giant redwood trees, breathing in the clean, salt-tinged air. I reconnected with old friends, like Rachel, who celebrated my newfound freedom. We had dinner, and for the first time in my adult life, I could talk about my future, my own plans, my own dreams, without the unspoken fear that they would be sacrificed for someone else's. Some nights, usually when I'm exhausted after a long shift, the memory of that helicopter video will float into my mind. I can still see the confetti, still hear the echo of my mother's laughter, but it doesn't hurt anymore. The sharp, stabbing pain of betrayal has faded into a dull scar. It doesn't trigger a spiral of anger or grief. Instead, it just reminds me of who I used to be, the girl who thought her only value was in what she could provide for others. It reminds me of the steep price I paid to learn that my peace is not a renewable resource for others to consume. It's my own precious, non-negotiable asset. And now, finally, I'm the only one in charge of the accounts. If you've ever been treated like your kindness was a credit line, or your love was a resource to be endlessly drawn upon, you are not alone. For years, I thought being the responsible one was my duty, but I learned it was just my role in a system that was designed to drain me. Family should be a safe harbor, built on mutual love and respect, not a series of one-sided transactions. Taking my power back wasn't about revenge. It was about resolution. It was about closing accounts that were emotionally and financially bankrupt. It was about finally giving myself the same care and protection I had so freely given to everyone else. And now, for the first time, I get to use my paycheck, my time, and my energy for myself. The quiet I've built is worth more than any amount of money I lost. If you have ever been the fixer in your family, the one who carries the weight so others don't have to, hit like, subscribe, and comment to let me know where you're watching from. Your peace matters, and it's the one thing worth fighting for.